Space, vast, cold, and unyielding, holds secrets older than time itself. Secrets that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about humanity, our origins, and the terrifying truth of why we left a world that was once our home. This is the story of the Tome of the Forgotten, a discovery that uncovered humanity's darkest past and awakened something that was never meant to rise again. The crew of the Stellar Veil wasn't looking for anything special when they found it. They were explorers, venturing into uncharted systems on the fringes of known space. Captain Naomi Vance, an experienced but cautious leader, had spent decades navigating through cosmic anomalies and asteroid belts. But this system, designated Erebus 7, was unlike anything she'd encountered before. Erebus 7 was a dead star system. 7 planets orbited a dying red dwarf, their surfaces battered by millennia of solar flares and cosmic radiation. Most of the planets were lifeless, scorched wastelands, but the third planet, labeled Kalos on their navigation charts, was different. It had an atmosphere, breathable air, and the faint signs of ancient structures poking through layers of ash and ice. Kalos shouldn't have existed. The system's records were flagged as a no-fly zone, classified and buried in the archives of the Interstellar Union. But the Stellar Veil had stumbled into it, a glitch in their warp drive, forcing an emergency drop in the vicinity of the Forbidden System. Stranded, low on fuel, and with no backup arriving for weeks, Captain Vance made the decision that would change everything. They would explore Kalos. The Stellar Veil touched down on the surface of Kalos, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of ash. The planet was eerily silent, the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing against the ears and filling the void with a sense of foreboding. Captain Vance stepped out first, her boots crunching against the brittle, frozen ground. It was cold, not the kind of cold that stings your skin, but a bone-deep chill, as though the planet itself resented their presence. The sky was a muted gray, with streaks of crimson from the dying star bleeding through thick clouds of ash. Surrounding the landing site were ruins, massive, sprawling structures made of black stone, their surfaces etched with alien glyphs that pulsed faintly as though still alive. Lieutenant Arlo Hayes, the team's linguist, ran his gloved fingers over the glyphs, muttering, "These carvings, they're ancient, but there's something familiar about them, almost like proto-human script." The rest of the crew dismissed it as a coincidence, the desperate ramblings of a man trying to find patterns where there were none. But Hayes wasn't wrong. The deeper they ventured into the ruins, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Shadows seemed to shift at the edges of their vision, and the sound of their breathing echoed unnaturally, as though the planet itself was listening. At the heart of the ruins, they found it, a massive obsidian slab, half buried in the frozen ground, its surface covered in the same glyphs they'd seen before. But this was no ordinary artifact. The slab pulsed with an inner light, its glow syncing with the crew's heartbeats, faster and faster as they approached. "Is this a book?" Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. It wasn't a book in the traditional sense. It had no pages, no spine. But as Hayes touched it, the glyphs shifted, reconfiguring themselves into something recognizable. Words. English words. The crew stared in stunned silence as the slab began to speak. Not in sound, but in their minds. It revealed itself as the Tome of the Forgotten, an artifact created by a race long extinct, a race it called human. The moment Hayes touched the tome, a pulse of light surged from the glyph-covered surface, illuminating the room in a brilliant, unnatural glow. The crew staggered back, shielding their eyes as a cold, metallic voice echoed in their minds. It didn't speak in any audible language, but rather in thoughts, embedding its words directly into their consciousness. "You were never meant to return." Hayes froze, his hand still pressed against the tome. His eyes widened as tears streamed down his face, unbidden. He wasn't crying out of sadness, but something deeper, a visceral, primal fear he couldn't comprehend. The words continued, unraveling a story buried for millennia. "Kalos was your home, the cradle of your species. Here, humanity thrived for eons, reaching heights of progress and knowledge unmatched in this galaxy. But your kind grew arrogant, blind to the darkness that dwelled beneath. The room seemed to shudder with the weight of the tome's words. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Hayes remained transfixed, as though tethered to the artifact. He whispered, his voice trembling, "We didn't come from Earth. We were refugees." The tome responded, "You fled. The great exodus, born of desperation, led you to the pale blue you now call Earth. It was a lifeboat, a haven to escape the nightmare that consumed this world. But you left something behind. You left it behind." The crew stared at one another, horrified. The questions came rapidly now, each one cutting deeper. "Left what behind?" Captain Vance asked, her voice sharp but shaking. The glyphs on the tome pulsed erratically, growing brighter as the voice shifted in tone, becoming more ominous. "The Warden." The name sent a ripple of unease through the group. The room seemed colder, darker. Hayes stumbled back, finally breaking contact with the tome. But it was too late. The voice continued, its presence suffocating. "It was your hubris that summoned it, your ambition that woke it. The Warden is the parasite of fear, the predator of sentience. It feasts on the weak and the proud alike, growing stronger with every soul it devours. Your ancestors fled to save themselves, abandoning their world to the abyss. But the Warden never left. It has been here, waiting, hungering, and now it knows you've returned." The crew's minds raced, trying to piece together the impossible truth. Lieutenant Hayes, who had been silent, whispered the question they were all afraid to ask. Why did it let us escape? Why didn't it follow us to Earth back then? The answer came, cold and unfeeling. It doesn't follow. It waits. It knows you will return. It knew you would come back. The crew erupted into arguments. Vance demanded answers. Was the tome lying? Was this some kind of trap? But in the midst of their confusion, the voice spoke one final time before falling silent. "You should not have come. You should not have woken it." And then, the ruins began to tremble. The sound started as a faint vibration, like distant thunder rumbling beneath the surface. But it grew louder, more insistent, until it felt as though the entire planet was groaning under its own weight. The crew stumbled, clutching at walls as the ruins around them came alive. The shadows, those faint flickers they dismissed as tricks of the light, began to move. "Captain!" shouted Jonas, the ship's engineer, as he pointed to the far corner of the room. The shadows there seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, spiraling upward into a mass of writhing darkness. The thing that emerged was not a creature in any traditional sense. It had no face, no limbs, no eyes to meet their terrified stares. It was a living void, a pulsating mass of shadows that shifted and warped, growing larger with every passing second. Lieutenant Hayes dropped to his knees, clutching his head. "It's in my mind. It's inside me," he screamed, his voice breaking. "It's showing me things, horrible things." The Warden didn't attack outright. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough to unhinge them. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though it were being sucked out of the room. Each crew member felt the same intrusive voice worming its way into their minds, dredging up their deepest fears, their darkest memories. Jonas was the first to snap. He let out a guttural scream, pulled his sidearm, and fired wildly into the shadows. The bullets disappeared into the Warden's form without effect, the mass rippling as though laughing at his futile defiance. "Run!" Captain Vance shouted, yanking Jonas toward the exit. But there was no exit. The Warden was everywhere now, its shadows stretching along the walls, filling every corridor. It wasn't chasing them. It was hurting them, driving them deeper into the ruins. The crew stumbled through the labyrinthine ruins, their footsteps echoing as the Warden's hum grew louder, vibrating through their very bones. Captain Vance clutched the comm unit strapped to her chest, screaming into it. "Stellar Vale, this is Vance. Prep the ship for immediate takeoff. Do you copy?" The comm crackled with static, but no reply came. Jonas tripped over a fallen beam, his breathing ragged. "We're not going to make it," he cried. "It's playing with us. It's—" The Warden surged forward, a tendril of shadow piercing Jonas's chest like a spear. His scream was cut short as the life drained from his body, leaving behind a withered husk. The remaining crew reached the exit, the faint glow of daylight spilling through the shattered doorway. The stellar veil sat on the horizon, its engines warming up. Vance dragged Hayes by the arm, who was barely able to walk. "Move! Move!" she shouted. The warden followed, its form expanding, engulfing the ruins in total darkness. As they sprinted across the frozen terrain, they could hear it whispering in their minds. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You brought this upon yourselves." The Stellar Veil's ramp was already lowering as they approached. Vance shoved Hayes aboard, then turned back to see the warden's tendrils stretching toward them. With a roar, she fired her plasma rifle into the shadows, the heat momentarily driving them back. "Get us off this rock!" she screamed as the ramp closed behind her. The engines roared to life, and the ship blasted off into the atmosphere. From the viewport, they could see the warden's massive form rising, stretching upward as though it could reach the stars. Its scream echoed in their minds, a final promise. "You will never escape." The journey back to Earth was harrowing. No one spoke. Hayes spent most of the trip staring blankly out of viewport, mumbling incoherently about the things he'd seen. Vance sat in the captain's chair, clutching the ship's controls with white-knuckled hands, her mind replaying the events on Kalos over and over. But the real horror came when they reached Earth. As they descended into the atmosphere, the ship's sensors picked up a faint signal, an energy signature originating from the planet's surface. It was the same as the tome. The warden's mark had followed them home, and now it was only a matter of time. Vance dragged Hayes by the arm, who was barely able to walk. "Move! Move!" she shouted. The warden followed, its form expanding, engulfing the ruins in total darkness. As they sprinted across the frozen terrain, they could hear it whispering in their minds. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You brought this upon yourselves." The Stellar Veil's ramp was already lowering as they approached. Vance shoved Hayes aboard, then turned back to see the warden's tendrils stretching toward them. With a roar, she fired her plasma rifle into the shadows, the heat momentarily driving them back. "Get us off this rock!" she screamed as the ramp closed behind her. The engines roared to life, and the ship blasted off into the atmosphere. From the viewport, they could see the warden's massive form rising, stretching upward as though it could reach the stars. Its scream echoed in their minds, a final promise. "You will never escape." The journey back to Earth was harrowing. No one spoke. Hayes spent most of the trip staring blankly out of viewport, mumbling incoherently about the things he'd seen. Vance sat in the captain's chair, clutching the ship's controls with white-knuckled hands, her mind replaying the events on Kalos over and over. But the real horror came when they reached Earth. As they descended into the atmosphere, the ship's sensors picked up a faint signal, an energy signature originating from the planet's surface. It was the same as the tome. The warden's mark had followed them home, and now it was only a matter of time.